Welcome to the great conversation where ideas matter. Ideas shape markets. Ideas change the world. What are the stories that we tell ourselves? What are the stories we believe in? What are the stories we tell that we don't believe in? What are the useful narratives that may pull us out of non-performance of our organization, whether it's government or private businesses? And we're going to turn to someone who's taken stories to the next level. And it's based on good research, good strategy, and quite frankly, a good sense of the narratives that dictate our success or failure in the marketplace. Welcome to Peter Singer, co-founder of Useful Fiction. Peter, great having you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
And there's so much, as everyone knows, we try to keep this to 20-something minutes. There's so much to explore here, but I'm actually just going to turn to Peter because he's got books that are definitive, seminal in scope. He's got new programs he's working on, but let me ask you a fundamental question, Peter, because you have your pulse on the marketplace. What is front of mind for you right now? What is going on right now that's useful for us to poke our finger into?
I think it's the overwhelming sense of not just change and transition, but how it all comes together. And it feels like a crisis layered upon crisis. So, you think about, it's my background. I come out of the world of working on primarily technology and security issues. And you think about everything that's going on there from, competition with China and what that means for everything from supply chain to cybersecurity to we've got transitions going on in AI and robotics that are monumental, not just for, this year, but literally, human history lifetime. Oh, by the way, we've got, we're still, kind of knock on wood coming out of a pandemic. And then we've got political crisis after political crisis, whether it's Ukraine to what it feels like is going on in domestic politics. And it just feels so overwhelming. So that's top of mind for me. And I feel like that's top of mind for people who don't just work in security issues, but whether it's, someone who's at a bank to food services, you name it. It's just, how do we deal with so much that's going on? It's filling up our mind and media space.
And it's existential in scope. If we look through history, there have been great disruptions, and we can't suggest just because we're supposedly more mature now in our culture, in our systems, we can't pretend that those disruptions can't happen again. There have been great migrations. There have been great pandemics. There's been turmoil. The thing that led to the Dark Ages was a political system that basically controlled the world at the time. And suddenly it was disrupted by too many fronts on the battle lines, and that was called the Roman Empire, followed by a pandemic and supply chain disruptions. So those things have happened before. Do you get the sense that they're happening again?
Wow, this is a really optimistic conversation we're having so far.
But if we speak truth to what is going on, we have a chance to rectify it or mitigate it.
So what I love you've done is you've pulled from history, and I'm a history buff in terms of my hobbies. I relax by reading history on vacation, but also because I think there's a great deal to learn. There's the saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. I think there's many things to pull from. Now, you went further back in time, Dark Ages. I don't know if that's the apt parallel, but as an example, we did a book of what we'll talk about later, a useful fiction called Burn-In. And the subtitle of it was a novel of the real robotic revolution. And what it was going after is when we think about AI and robotics, there's the science fiction narrative of, the robot uprising, they're going to come kill us all. But rather, I think a more apt parallel is the Industrial Revolution, where you think about disruption that happens at everything from the business level and the individual employee level, and how that affects, not just industry. Some are winners, some are losers. To there's migration, people moving to different locations. To, oh, by the way, there's also political disruption, and it's both good and bad. I mean, the last Industrial Revolution, we got everything from children's rights, women's rights, workers' rights. Those all come out of the Industrial Revolution. Oh, by the way, so did the concepts of communism and fascism. And so, I don't think we're going out on a limb by saying with robotics and AI, it has a lot of facets of an industrial revolution, both for better and for worse. And we're living through it. And so what Burn-In was a project to try and wrap our heads around what that all means, but share it in a more engaging manner. So it was a research. The project was called AI Visualized. And what we did is from doing everything from, pulling consulting company reports and World Bank reports to interviews of everyone from CEOs to computer scientists. What did they feel was most important that people needed to understand about AI and robotics? We actually identified exactly 300 tidbits, so to speak, real world insights. But then found the most effective manner to share them was not through, a turgid, nonfiction, lengthy book, but rather we framed it in a novel. So going back to that subtitle, it was a novel of the robotic revolution. So you get the good stuff while you read.
Yeah, let's pull on that string a little bit, because this value of telling story, and then in particular, a fictitious story. Why did you choose that method, number one? And number two, how are people consuming it? What's your case studies tell you about that method of delivery and consumption?
So I'll start out with a story of how myself and my partner in the company fell into this business. We both came out of the nonfiction writing world. I'd written a number of nonfiction books on everything from cybersecurity to robotics to social media. That's actually what you and I engaged with many years back. My partner, August Cole, was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. But we teamed up on and wrote a couple of years back a novel called Ghost Fleet, but it was a different kind of novel. It was a novel with 27 pages of endnotes. It was like a Tom Clancy in style. It visualized what a war between the US and China and Russia would look like. But it was also trying to share real world insight on everything from cybersecurity issues, supply chain, you name it. And we had a rule in it that, every technology, every setting, even some of the things that the characters say would have a footnote to document, hey, we didn't make this up. This is real. A different way of thinking about it is it's a little bit like what I do to my kids every morning. I sneak fruit and veggies into their smoothie. So in this case, it was, if you think of like a Clancy or a science fiction, that's like a milkshake. It's sweet. It's designed for entertainment. Yeah, maybe there might be some good stuff in there, like a strawberry milkshake, but then really at the end of the day, it wasn't designed for that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have your white paper, your board briefing document, your PowerPoint. That's like kale, right? I mean, it's good for you. It's just hard to get people to consume it. And so we came up with this concept that we called useful fiction, where it's you take the fruit and vegetables, the nonfiction content, but you share it through a story. And what happened is it took off. The book sold well. And certainly achieved greater resonance than any of our past nonfiction works. But what was really interesting is that it had the most impact of our respective careers. I had books on, bestsellers and on professional reading lists, and invited to, speak at conferences alongside folks like you, to CEOs and the like. August had written front page articles for the journal. And yet this combination of narrative and nonfiction, we were invited to share the real world lessons of it, everywhere from the White House Situation Room to JSOC, the team that got bin Laden, to the Nobel Institute. But what was really interesting is, besides the briefings and insights and reaching a wider audience, it led to a great deal of real world change. On one hand, there were 3 different government investigations launched to keep things that happened in the book from coming true. In turn, there were a variety of programs launched to make things that happen in the book come true, including a $3.6 billion US Navy ship program that was literally named after our book. And so from that experience, we realized there's something going on here. And we formed a business around it. And the business basically does 2 things. We work with client organizations that have ranged from government, Special Operations Command, to Fortune 500, to help turn their nonfiction content, their board reports, their trend reports, their white papers, into visualization, short stories that are like those smoothies. They help explain it in a more effective manner. They help people visualize it. And then the second thing we do is we run training conferences, leader conferences, where we'll take a group of leaders through that journey. And, to your question, the why behind it, it actually, now I'm going to get wonky with you. There's a science behind it. The science tells us that narrative story is a more effective means of conveying new or complex information. If you read a white paper, if you read a memo, 2 parts of your brain light up. If that same information is shared through a story, 4 parts of your brain light up. Another aspect that anyone from business knows is that it's often not merely the facts, it's the emotion that drives action. Think about a used car salesman, think about a politician. And so narrative brings in emotion. And then the final thing is the ask, whether we're talking about a CEO, a 4-star general, or we're talking about a young lieutenant, someone in your workforce. It's a far different ask of them to say, hey, can you read this short story, this scenario, versus read this white paper? And we can also reach them in alternative locations and times. So people are happy to read a short story on a weekend or on a plane in a way they wouldn't be if you gave them a board briefing or you gave them a white paper. And so that's what the business is. We've been at it for a year. It's been crazy exciting. And as you and I were talking about, what's been interesting for me is not only the groups we work with, but it's led to a little bit of an education for myself where, we build these interesting stories, but along the way, I've had to figure out all the boring stuff of running a company. Like, just before this, we were figuring out our insurance plan.
Well, Peter, just a short anecdote, just to confirm everything you've talked about, because I am known for my white papers and my wonky things. I do research for CEOs and I come together with the facts, right? And the plan that I think is based on that facts. And there was one pivotal moment where this CEO just rejected everything. He said, no, too much money. It's not going to happen, right? So he turned my white paper into a useful fiction. It's not going to happen. And of course, my counterpoint was it was. So what I did is I plagiarized the logo of the Wall Street Journal, and as if I had actually written an article for the Wall Street Journal. Somebody had written an article, I should say, not me. And it was about how somebody took the idea I had in my strategy paper and executed and was making millions of dollars. And I tucked it under the door. So it was a Wall Street Journal article, right? It was definitely fiction. And he didn't know it. And he came running into my office. He goes, "I'm sorry, we should have done this. I can't believe it. We're way behind the curve." And I go, and I fell on my sword and told him what I had done, because I was playing not only with the facts, but the emotion, like you just talked about. And so it's just fascinating to me that people like the Army Cyber Command turned to Vernon and said, wait, I've read this book 2 or 3 times. And it starts a whole different discussion with you on whether that can really happen or not, right?
And what's great about that anecdote that you shared is it illustrates 2 things. One is the goal that you have in transforming that nonfiction to narrative. And the second is the wide variety of forms that you might utilize in such an exercise. So the goal is, in some situations, we work with organizations, it's to provoke a action based off of the emotion of fear. And that's, you gave that example. It's create a bad future outcome such that the reader, whether it's that CEO or it's a senator or it's, a member of your organization, here's a really, really bad day that you've experienced through a synthetic environment, with the idea that you go, ooh, I do not want that to happen. What are we going to do to keep that from coming true? There's the flip side you can do, which is that you can paint a really good scenario, some kind of positive outcome, some kind of skill set in your workforce that a character might have. And so the reaction is, wow, I really like that outcome. We're not going to get that outcome right now. What can we do to make that come true? There's another type, which is just, it's purely explanatory. So to give you an example of that, we did a project for NATO, the military alliance, where they had a research report on quantum technology, which is arguably one of the most important but most complex new technology areas out there. And they wanted their senior leaders to understand it. And, they created, it was like a 30-page report, and it had all this new vocabulary, and it just didn't strike with effect. And so what we did is we turned that report into 3 short stories. So one was it followed a commando team through the catacombs of Paris as they hunt a terrorist. But what it was is, along the way, it was sharing the vocabulary of quantum technology. So as opposed to giving, the equivalent of the CEO, here's your glossary, here you need to understand these words and definitions, they got it by reading the short story. So there was no emotional intent other than, let's wrap your head around it. So the next time you see it, you'll understand it. And so that's the first part that you hit. And the other, as you gave your example, is the variety of different forms that you might utilize in useful fiction. So there's, the straight up story, very classic, follow a character. It might be third person. It might be first person. We did one that was a story written from the perspective of a CEO riding in coach class a week after a ransomware attack had hit their company. And it was, sort of to put him in a bad situation. Or like you put it, you can create fake documents, and it might be a fake news article. It might be a fake government document. We did another one that your listeners might find enjoyable. It was a fake, as if it was it was a fake report to investors. And it was, in the language of, that sort of quarterly report that's being given from someone about, here's how I view, what's going on in the market and the like. But it was actually, if you'll imagine, it was to help people understand the effects of continued US-China competition. So you can use all sorts of different forms and to hit a variety of different emotions. You tailor it to what you're after.
So good, so good. And it struck me, again, didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a program or a methodology that you've developed, but I was trying to confer with the CEO how to sell the new strategy to the company, which would require change. And we wanted it to be seen as an opportunity. And we took Jim Collins' Good to Great, and we developed a mock program that he had developed, a Good to Great reward for smaller companies that had gone from good to great. And we ended up creating an awards ceremony in front of the company. And Jim Collins is delivering the award and then interviewing the CEO on how it happened. How did we win this award 5 years from now? And it was a wonderful, wonderful narrative. And it was so good that some of the employees thought I was Jim Collins, which, which was kind of interesting. So it works. It works. And I didn't ever think of it as a methodology. Are people beginning to grasp this with your customers going, oh my gosh, we need a good story?
So first, that example you gave, it reminds me of one package we did for Special Operations Command, and this is not classified, so I can share it. It was like many businesses, they're looking at the world and it's changing, and they're trying to figure out over the next 20 years, not only what are their roles and responsibilities going to be, and this is when you say Special Operations Command, you're talking about Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Green Berets, etc. And so they're looking at the world saying, how is it changing? What are our changing roles and responsibilities? But also part of that question is, who are we? What are the skills that we have right now, the type of personnel that we're recruiting right now, and what are we going to need over the next 10 to 20 years? And so they had some really interesting work on that, some white papers on it, and they wanted to share that concept. And so the framing that we did to help the wider group understand it is we changed it. It's a little bit of parallel with what you were talking about. We turned it into a retirement speech, but given by someone in 2040. So the person was looking back on their career, on their life at this retirement ceremony. But of course, it's in 2040. So what they're sharing is all the changes that the organization wants to have happen over the next 20 years. So that's the fun of this new job, is we get to take that, that kale and figure out how do you make it into something that people enjoy, but also find useful. And yeah, it's worked. We started the business 14 months back. And it's grown. I think we're on our 36th contract so far. It's been with, US military, Australian military, British government, Canadian government. We've also done it with, a couple of Fortune 500s and a nonprofit, as well. And yeah, people have found them really, useful. The metrics tend to back it up. So it's a good example of that. I'll give you a great example of that. We did a project for the Australian government. They had a white paper on education enterprise reform. So how they needed to change the enterprise side of their education system. 21-page report, reflecting a lot of organizational effort. Obviously, really important topic, but let's be honest. I don't hear anyone listening to us right now going, ooh, can I Google that report? Where can I get it? And so what we did is we turned that report into a narrative. We identified its 3 key themes, its 37 nonfiction insights that they wanted to share. So, what were the fruit and vegetables? And we turned it into a story. The story's called Eye for a Storm. The story has since been read by over 15,000 readers across their government and military system and beyond. It was republished in an online journal that's popular among millennial security folks called Task and Purpose. So the numbers were far greater than what they would have achieved otherwise. But what was really interesting is among those 15,000 readers was the head of the entire Australian military and 6 US 4-star equivalents. So at the level of kind of the governmental version of a CEO. You're not normally getting them to read 21-page reports on education enterprise reform, but we got them with that narrative. And it's a great example to us of how you can transform a topic into something engaging. And we also like to talk about that example because, if you can do it on education, enterprise reform, I mean, you can do it on anything.
Well, you just got my brain firing all the synopsis right now, because I'm thinking, my gosh, it sounds like I could have your team study even an industry, if you think in a market ecosystem like healthcare or security or technology, and have a bunch of different CEOs in the room. And you could probably develop a narrative and test it in front of those people and have them on the edge of their seats, couldn't you?
So you could do that in two different ways. So one is with a group, you could, you would identify what is that nonfiction content. And again, it might be CEOs, it might be, we call them SME, subject matter experts. So it might be, a member of your team that's your lead person on whatever, quantum technology or healthcare tech, whatever it is. And, we work with the group and say, okay, what is it that we're trying to share? And also back to that, what are those emotions? And then another important part of this is who's your target audience? And, again, you're going to have a different kind of story for different audiences because they have different emotions that you want to provoke. In our training classes, one of the more informative for we did this one for the British government. So we brought in a Hollywood writer to talk about this idea of target audiences and matching. And he basically shared with them, look, there's no movie that hits all audience. He's like, I'm an expert. He's written, number one blockbuster movies. And he's like, look, it would be great if you could write a movie that was simultaneously something that 9-year-old boys, someone on a date, and your grandmother would all want to go to. That does not exist.
Right.
So why are you trying to tell us he's like, if I'm an expert in this and I can't do it, why are you trying to, tell the same story to whether it's your workforce or an outside audience to your board? He's like, why are you trying to do that? So one track is, essentially kind of, we do it for groups. Another is what I was referencing there, that workshop where you bring people together and it's a combination of one, what are the skills of narrative and, bringing in a mix of, like, what we do is it's not just like fictional writers, but as an example, we'll bring in journalists. So like we had the New York Times science reporter who would talk through, here's how I take complex tech topics and turn them into something that a more general audience can understand. You also might want to bring in examples of your target audience. So like when we did this for a military group, one of the speakers we brought in was actually a retired 4-star admiral. And he talked about, not the future of war. He talked about, here's how I wanted to be briefed versus how people actually briefed me, which is, something really useful for people to hear in their careers. But then the other part of that kind of workshop approach is you dig into what are the stories that we aren't telling well. And again, when I say stories, I'm not talking about, made up stories. I'm talking about what are the themes, what are the issues, but also what are the lies that we tell about ourselves and what we do. And then you take that combination of identifying the stories, but also the skills for good storytelling. And we'll take the group through where, all right, let's do it. And we've run groups that range from, generals to lieutenants to CEOs through this, where they're the ones creating the scenario that best explains what they're after. So again, there's two different tracks. Both of them can yield different results. I would add one of the last things that's really fun about the workshop approach is that we end it with it's a writer's room. And if you've watched like a TV show, it's the way like TV show, they're created, a writer presents their ideas and then other people are kicking back improvements and changes on those ideas to refine it. And it makes the final story better, but it also helps for certain groups to kind of get into the mindset of, hey, we've all got ideas, but we also have to be open to editing and changing those ideas. And it's really, again, that it's a very different kind of experience for people than your normal, training workshop.
So these workshops, those are high-powered people in the room. Are we talking an hour, 2 hours, 3 days?
Oh, no, you're talking, we've done them, you're talking either a day or a 2-day to do it right. Again, and it really depends on how much you want to dig into it and the level of outside speakers that you're bringing in. So yeah, look, there's different types of skills that you're trying to go after this. What we found, it's really good to do as either a culmination to a larger exercise, or that you can do it as part of a retreat. Different organizations have these leader retreats, and they're usually a mix of come in and let's hear presentations on how the business is going. Then there's the other part that's some kind of fun. Let's go golf. Let's go to an escape room. And then there's often like a kind of, I'm being kind of mean here, but some kind of boring training or an outside speaker that comes in who kind of, isn't tailored to the group. What we try and do is give it meshes within that idea of both. This is entertaining. It'll be engaging for people. They'll enjoy it, but also they'll walk away from it with some skills in their own professional lives that they can use forward in terms of the next time they give a speech, the next time they give they're building a memo or a pitch, they'll have these tools of narrative that they can deploy, but also potentially we've got some scenarios that group can go after and use in their own practice.
Peter Singer, you have taken us through quite a ride here. Not only your personal journey of being a wonk that turned to a storyteller, but also you mentioned at the beginning, crisis upon crisis. And as I reflect now on our great conversation, we, especially in this world, what some call a VUCA world, volatility, uncertainty, we can actually be trading or connecting in stories others are creating, or we can harness our own stories for strategic advantage, government or real world commerce. This has been an outstanding conversation, Peter Singer, and thank you so much.
Oh, appreciate you having me on.